Welcome back. In lecture 22, we will start with urban land suitability assessment. The different concepts that we will cover are steps in land suitability assessment, urban land suitability analysis factors, land suitability analysis methods, weighted linear combination, analytical hierarchy process, land suitability index model. So, the last three concepts are basically different ways to do land suitability analysis. So, in the last lecture, we have covered municipal boundary adjustment, area expansion, or more or less we have talked about how we determine the new land area that is required based on the total population growth of an area or carrying capacity of an area. We have discussed about that earlier. And then we have also talked about how to expand the area, how much to grow within the existing urban boundary, where to expand the boundary, and when expansion takes place, the expansion actually tries to integrate surrounding villages. And when surrounding villages are integrated, then not only areas which are already under residential development are integrated into the urban area, but also lot of open land or agricultural land is also integrated in the within the municipal area. Now, when we have this expansion, and the expansion whenever it is undertaken, it is actually undertaken for the next 20 years or the next 15 years. So, it is not like at the beginning the entire land would be used up. So, we also need to determine what land, which part, and also some of the land that would be integrated into the municipal area may be of a certain kind, maybe they may include some wetlands, they may include some very good agricultural area which could be repurposed for maybe urban agriculture or for developing some sort of landscape areas or plantation areas which will act as a breather to the entire urban area that is in hand. So, to do that or to determine that what sort of, in this new particular area, what sort of land use or what sort of activity will be permitted or will be suitable, we usually conduct land suitability assessment. So, land suitability assessment is basically grouping of land areas as per their suitability for a particular use, and this actually is done in a scientific manner and in a rational manner, so that so that we can properly decide on which area is suitable for what purpose. And some examples of this is we determine land which is suitable for agriculture, may be suitable for ecological preservation purposes, suitable for forestry or plantations, suitability for flooding control. Like in urban areas, we need to reserve lot of land through which we can control floods. For example, we want to preserve land for as detention basins for water. That means whenever there is lot of rainfall happening in the urban area, suddenly the huge amount of rainfall, it doesn't, the drainage channels are not designed to immediately take it out. So, there has to be some detention period, and it cannot be, if we don't design a detention area, then automatically streets and urban areas would be flooded. So, we can design areas which are supposed to take in this extra water during rainfall, and that is why flooding control areas also need to be determined. And as you can understand, flooding control areas doesn't need to be at a location which is very central to the areas which are already having lot of transportation infrastructure or other kind of development. So this is one criteria which could help us in deciding flooding control area and so on. Similarly, there has to be lot of criteria for different purposes. And similarly, we can also have land suitability analysis conducted to determine land suitable for industrial purpose, land suitable for residential areas, and so on. But more or less, when we conduct land suitability assessment, usually it is for some specific purposes which are need to be reserved for an urban area, or for broader decisions like which areas to develop, which areas to retain for future, or which areas to retain for uses like ecological areas or for forestry, plantation, and so on. So, we use GIS techniques, and usually GIS is the tool that is being used to both control and monitor changes in an urban area. And also using GIS, we can also determine what kind of ecological effects can a particular area or a particular certain factors associated with an area can have. So GIS in that way helps us to create both the maps and the databases, which helps us to take these decisions. And then we usually, what we do is we determine the suitable locations of development using GIS mapping, and what we map is actually the suitability index of a specific area. That means we divide the entire area into smaller parts, and then we determine the suitability for that particular objective, of course. What areas has to be is suitable, and we give them a score, and that score could be, based on that score we can create maps which may be presented in different colors, showing that okay, this area is of a higher suitability, this area is of a lower suitability, and so on. And suitability analysis usually is undertaken using multi-criteria decision analysis. So these are the steps in the land suitability assessment process. First of all, we need to delineate the study area and determine the objectives of the study. So the entire process of doing the study depends on what objective we are working for. That means based on that objective, we would first determine the different appropriate factors and to assess the objectives. That means so if I am talking about determining residential area, probably my factors would look into accessibility criteria in terms of transport, or it may look into pollution criteria and so on, or it may look into slope. Whereas if I am looking for something else like plantation, then probably I will look into what kind of soil, what kind of water availability, and all those things could be evaluated. So the factors and also sub factors within factors are determined based on the objectives that we need to assess. Then after we have done that, we need to also determine scores for each of these factors and sub factors as per standards, benchmarks, perceptions, or preferences. Now, why so many things? Like for example, when we talk about standards or benchmarks, that means there are certain guidelines which have been set either by government bodies or by the actual assessor himself, that okay, if this area has got a slope of this kind, then probably it is not suitable, so I will give it a low score. If that area has a slope which is moderate, then I would give it a little bit higher score, and if it area is flat, then I will give it a very high score. That means it is suitable for doing some kind of construction activities maybe. So that means we need to determine the scores for each of these factors and sub factors, and it has to be related. And when we give scores, we can always assess using various criteria. For example, if it is land price, I may decide that okay, a certain land value range could be assigned a certain score, but usually if these values are normalized at the end, then automatically we can evaluate all of them in the same way. So that means we need to ultimately bring down all the factors and sub factors to the same way of scoring them. Then after we have given the scores for the actual condition for that particular factor in that particular zone or area, the next job is to determine out of all these factors which one is important or what weightage has to be given to each one of them. So the next step is to assign weights to each factors based on either experts or actual users. That means if actual users, we don't know who the actual users may be, and if actual users may not be able to take this kind of decisions, then we will actually ask the experts, people who understand the reasons for choosing this objective and also understand the factors that has been chosen, and they also understand how to score them. So only those people or these experts who are domain experts in this particular field has to be asked about that, okay, which factors do they feel important compared to others, so they can give some weightages to that. And sometimes it is very, very difficult to give weightage to factors which are dimensionally different. That means it may be land price along with that pollution. How do you evaluate that? We may bring pollution values into health effects that pollution causes and then put a monetary value to that, or similar way we have to, but sometimes it becomes very, very difficult to put the same weight to to assess the weight for these particular factors, and in that case we can actually go for equal weightages for all the different factors. That is also a possibility. The third way we can also do it is to go for a stepwise exclusion of unsuitable areas, and this is called sieve mapping. And by this process, what it means is we create maps of different on different factors and themes, and we create exclusion criteria. Like for a particular purpose, probably slope beyond a particular value is not important, not suitable. In that case, what we will do, we will exclude those areas from the map which are having a slope of certain value. And after that, we choose the next factor and so on, and we keep on excluding areas which are not suitable, and ultimately we are left out with only some amount of area in that entire area that we are assessing, and that actually would be suitable for that particular objective. And once we have understood this weightages and the scores, the next step is to create a composite map, and for each of this zone, and I have also included some more terms, a grid cell or a plot or a pixel, and all these divisions are based on how, in what details you are doing your analysis. For example, we can have zones which could be based on administrative boundaries. We can have grid cells where we make smaller units, where we divide the entire urban area into small cells, and maybe each cell may be of 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer, or maybe 0.5 kilometer by 5 kilometer, or even less. And or it could be per plot based, like for example, not very residential plots maybe, but maybe larger plots or chunks of land, that also could be considered. And this is particularly suitable when we are going with areas with lot of undulations and all. So we know that there are certain areas which has to be excluded. After excluding them, we can only left out areas could be divided into plots, because if I go with grid cells and all, then what happens, some part of the grid cell maybe falls within an excluded area, some part will be inside, so it would be very difficult to compare different grid cells. So we can go for either plots, and then we can also go with pixels. That means each pixel could be also considered to be given some scores for each of the different factors as well. Based on this method, or we can go with this sieve mapping method that we have already discussed, where total after these overlays we generate the total scores generated by multiplying factors with their weights, and we assign this score to each of this pixel, zone or grid, and we get a composite map by mapping those values in a GIS format. So once that is done, the next task is to group these zones or grids or plots or pixels, and it could be done by assuming a certain range, dividing the entire score that we have generated by multiplying factors into weights, divided into we can create some ranges for them. Like if the total value ranges from 1 to 4, then we can create 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and 3 to 4. We can create this different ranges, and we can say that range 1, the 0 to 1 is the least suitable, and maybe 3 to 4 is the highest suitable. In that way we can assign them. But again, this saying that 0 to 1 is less suitable, why not 1.1? So this boundary conditions that has to be set is very important. So we can also go for other techniques like k-means clustering and all, where we can also say that like the entire range has to be divided into 4 clusters or 5 clusters based on our requirement, and then based on this the scatter plots, or based on the spread of these different values, it can create those clusters in appropriate ways. So this is another method in which we can group those cells and represent them eventually in the map, showing which part is suitable and which part is not. So here we see one example by Lee Q, and they have done an urban land suitability analysis where they have tested land suitability for construction land and farmland for a particular urban area, and they have used several factors. As you can see, they have used the elevation index, they have used a slope index, they have used a traffic index, and then they have used a vegetation index. They have used almost the same. Some of the factors are common in both the suitability assessment, but some factors are different. For example, water resource index and soil erosion index has been added in farmland suitability, which is not there in the construction land suitability, whereas slope index and elevation index remains in that. So once that has been done, in the next step, these factors have been scored, and the criteria that has been used to score them is when the attribute that has been used for elevation is actual elevation of that particular land, where lesser than 10 meter, 10 to 15 meter, and greater than 15 meter are the three categories that has been created. And based on their impact levels, elevation which is lesser than 10 meter, that is low. That means construction shouldn't be much of a problem in that areas. In other, the more the height increases or the slope increases, there the construction difficulties may happen. So that's why it has given a moderate and then a high value to slope greater than elevation greater than 15 meter. And this is for elevation, sorry. And then for slope, they have given for slope lesser than 8 to 15 degrees, and slope greater than 15 degrees. So the first criteria is for elevation, higher than 10 meters, then 10 to 15 meters, and so on. And then for traffic index, the values that has been used, there could be different sub-factors within traffic index. I could have talked about congestion, I could have talked about accessibility, I could have talked about many other factors. But here they have taken distance to road, which is 0, that is the least impact, and then 0 to 3 kilometers, and then distance to road 3 kilometers. So that has got a high impact. So further away is actually bad in that sense. So accordingly, the scores have been given. The impact values are like low, moderate, high, and so on. And accordingly, the normalized values are given. That is, low is 1, moderate is 0.5, high is 0. And similarly for traffic index, high is 0, moderate is 0 to 1, low is 1. So better values have been given higher scores, and it has been normalized to put them all on the same page. All the values have been evaluated using the same scoring pattern. So similarly, farmland suitability also has been done, and we have also used the term NDVI, normalized difference vegetation index, which talks about the amount of greenery in a particular area. More the greenery, it's better. And when we have done this analysis, when this analysis was done, then land suitable for development and land suitable for agricultural farming was the objective that needed to be determined. And the different factors that were considered, that actually depended on two things. One is that factor suitable for assessing the objective? And the second criteria is availability of spatial data. That means, is data available to assess those objectives? If I don't have a elevation map, or if I don't have a contour map, I will not be able to generate neither the slope, neither the elevation. And then if I don't have a NDVI map or Landsat thematic mapper, we have already discussed that in one lecture, I guess. So this is the Landsat thematic mapper satellite imagery data, and which actually talks about the amount of vegetation in an area. So if that maps are not available, then we cannot create a vegetation index. So this availability of data is very important when we create the list of factors that we will use to evaluate. And then using this, we can develop land suitable for residential areas or for industrial areas and for landfill sites. So these are the other kinds of analysis that could be done, but probably we will need other factors. Like for landfill, we require many other criteria that needs to be looked into. For industrial areas, we will probably look into access to ports and other factors, and so on. So there are different land use suitability analysis methods that are used. We have already discussed them. Overlay mapping method, this is where we have talked about the sieving method. So we assume that the different criteria of the maps that are being used are independent with each other. That means if there is correlation between them, that we assume that correlation, we are not going to consider that, because certain things depend on other things. So we assume that each map is independent, and using each map independently, and then based on the exclusion criteria, we can arrive at our final objective or that suitable areas. And sometimes maps are not standardized, so that is another issue that may face in this particular method. In multi-criteria evaluation, MC, or multi-criteria decision-making methods, the one that we discussed where we have factors and scores, the final suitability maps depend on multi-criteria technique and standardization method. So there is no uniform or a final outcome which is going to be same every time. It will vary as per the standard, as per the standardization criteria that we have used. and the input data plays a big role. For example, the weightage is given varies from expert to experts, or if I go to a different urban area, we may get different results. If I use a different group of people to give the weightages, they will give different sorts of weightages. So input data plays a big role, and experts also needs to be aware of multiple domains and different aspects such as technical, economical and social effects of those particular, to determine the impacts of those particular scores. So sometimes it's very difficult for experts to even give those weightages. And sometimes to go around this process, we can use that different methods to actually evaluate, and then take an average value from all these methods. So the different MC methods could be weighted linear combination, analytic hierarchy process, and land suitability, and then there is also very specific models like land suitability index model, which is a model which is mostly used for ecological evaluations and all, but nonetheless it's an important model which also needs to, it gives us a different perspective compared to analytic hierarchy process or a weighted linear combination method. So in addition, so either we can use a sieving technique or we can use a multi-criteria evaluation technique. We can also go for artificial intelligence methods like cellular automata, artificial neural networks. So we have discussed cellular automata, where the development that should take place in the next cell depends on many factors plus the actual development in the nearby cell. So there is a sort of simulation which takes place, and based on the different criteria that is given, we can determine what is going to be the land use or in the next cell, and accordingly we can also determine suitability as well. So these are all black box models. So we are not going to cover that in this lecture, but primarily we are going to look into the MC methods. So in weighted linear combination, we have already discussed, we give a score for each option. There is an attribute weight, and then there is an attribute scale value. So this is the factor score which is normalized, and this is the weightages that is given. Then we sum it up and we give a score for each option or each particular zone. And then this can be combined with GIS overlays to create composite maps. That means we can also do some exclusion criteria at the beginning, and on the remaining area we can actually use these scores and weightages. So both the methods could be combined. So this is a very easy explanation. We have got different, the area is divided into cells. As you can see, this is the area. It has got a river flowing through it. It has got some forest land. It has got some contour maps are there. So we see the contours over here. Then we see the national highway going through this particular area, and then the city boundary is also there. Now this entire area is divided into zones. We can call it a grid cell. Like for example, the entire area is divided into cells, and each cell could be given a score. And we first give a rating of based on the first criteria, which is river, and we give a score of 1 when that particular cell has got a river body. If it is within 500 meter from the river, then we give a score of 2. If it is 1000 meter from the river, we give it a score of 3. And for forest, we also similarly, if it is within forest area, then we give it a score of 1. Then forest 500 meters from forest area 2, and 1,000 meters away it is 3. And same way we give values for slope. 1 is of course bad, 3 is good, and national highway, the more near to the national highway we are, we give it a higher score. So if we are within 1 kilometer, we give it a score of 3, and same goes for city boundary. If we are within the near the city boundary, then we give it a higher score, and so on. So we put these scores for each cell, then we multiply, and then we determine the weightages of each of these criteria. We give the maximum weightage to city boundary. Next we give it to to national nearness to national highway. Then the second criteria is this city boundary, and then of course presence of forest is the third. Fourth is slope, and fifth criteria is rivers. So based on accordingly we have given the weights. Now we multiply the scores with weights, and this is the score that we get, and finally we sum up for each of these pixels, like 2 plus 3 plus 6 plus 5 plus 4. In that way we sum up and we get the overall score for this pixel, and we get, and this is our composite map. Finally we can create clusters within the map showing that ranges starting from 42 to 45. This is one range. this is one suitability zone. So in that way we can say that scores which are in this range, which is the most highest range, are the most suitable. So similarly, we also have, so this is the first weighted method, and the second method is analytic hierarchy process. And here this is also a MCDM approach, and this was first developed by Sati, and it's a hierarchical model. We have got different, first we have the objective, like for example in this particular figure you can see the where we are trying to choose a particular vehicle. The overall satisfaction, determine the highest overall satisfaction is our objective, and we have got factors like mechanics of the car, aesthetics of the car, and the comfort level offered by the car are the three factors that are being considered. Then we have got sub factors like mechanics, we have got brakes, quality of shift, that means the quality of the gear, then the horsepower, the power of the vehicle, and even the wheel sizes may do play a role. Wheels could be also aesthetically pleasing, so the design of the wheels, then the color of the wheels, the color of the vehicle and the shape of the vehicle, this may play a role in my decision. And then we have air conditioning, seats, and other optionals. So these are the different values for comfort that are factors, sub factors that have been used for comfort. Now, weights of the factors and sub-factors contributing to the factor are calculated using a preference scale and pairwise comparison matrix. So, the difference between previous method and this particular method is here we do pairwise comparison. That means we take two examples like between brakes and quality of shifts for mechanics, and then we compare which one is more important. And actually using that pairwise comparison we create a matrix, but the score that is given to the matrix looks like this. We call it a fundamental scale for pairwise comparison of factors, where 1 to 8 we have got 9 we have got different scores as per intensity of importance, where 1 is equal importance, two activities contribute equally to the objective, and whereas 9 is absolute importance, one activity is favored over another to the highest possible order, and in between scores are like that. And if it is 1 by 9, which is the reciprocal, that means if one activity is preferred, the other activity is of course the least preferred, is maximum preferred, the other activity is least preferred. So in a matrix we have from if I put the, I will just show you. So in a matrix, if I over here you can see that we have elevation index, slope index, traffic index, vegetation index, like in the previous study that we were studying earlier, and also in this side we have written at the top. So we have in elevation index and elevation index, of course that is 1 because they are of equal value. The elevation index to compare to slope index, that is 1 by 2, that means slope is better. When we take slope index by elevation index, it is 2, that is 2, that is 2 times. In that way we create these scores, and then combining these scores into weights, we can use different techniques for that. And it could be averaging of the values of pairwise comparison, or there could be other methods as well. So I am not getting into discussion of those particular methods, but eventually we want to arrive at a list of weights for each of these factors, and we know that what is the final contribution of that factor, and score of course is done in the same way. So here you can see pairwise comparison matrix and weights for construction land suitability, and similarly we have got values for farmland suitability. And once we have used those weightages and all, and we can also say that land suitability evaluation could be based on both of them. And here you can see a matrix which has been created for construction land in one side and farmland suitability on another side, and we can say where both are suitable, then it is unsuitable for development. When construction land is suitable but farmland is unsuitable, then it is suitable for development of that particular area. And when construction land suitability is unsuitable and farmland suitability is suitable, then it is suitable for development of probably farmland, or rather to keep it undeveloped. So it is unsuitable for development. So this kind of these comparisons could be also conducted. Next, we talk about this model, land suitability index model, which is a very very specialized model, where 3 indexes has been used. One is TVI, and this talks about the physical environment, and this is primarily to determine landscape ecology based on landscape ecology and general ecological theory, and it determines if our land is suitable when we consider all these particular aspects. So the first part that we considered is it considering different human activities and all, we create one index, that is TVI, and then the suitability of the biological environment, we create NHI, this is another index, and the suitability of functional environment, which is EHI. We will talk about this in detail later. And combining all these three indexes is actually done through this particular formula, where LSI is the land suitability index, and it is delta is of course the change in TVI, NHI and ECI, and K delta is basically the maximum value that is possible for change, that is over here it has been fixed at 65, and if this index actually the scores that comes ranges from between 1 to 6, and these are assigned to 6 ordinal categories of suitability, right. So you can see over here the first TVIs actually talks about environmental impact. So the impact level is low or high is actually calculated using this particular index. So it is calculated for TVI index, it is calculated for NHI index, and also calculated for ECI index. And from impact, we have to convert that to suitability, right. So that means if it is extremely impactful, then it is not suitable. If it is very low impact, then it is suitable. Same way we find these values and we assign them scores 1 to 6. Each one of them are assigned the same score, so that when we add up, we end up with the common framework to compare these three. So and then we have this final one, which is also evaluated in the same way. And once these three are done, then we combine them using this LSI to arrive at a score which ranges from 1 to 6, and where 1 is no action is required, and 2 is severe impact correction measures, then 3 is very strong impact correction measures, and so on, and then 6 is ordinary impact correction measures. That means there we have to really make some changes. So this is the structure of that particular index. You can see TVI is Territorial Vulnerability Index. It is again composed of multiple indexes like Vegetation Vulnerability Index, Substrate Vulnerability Index, Hydrological Vulnerability Index, and then Natural Heritage Index, which talks about Intrinsic Habitat Index, Corologic Interest Index, Landscape Metrics Index, and Ecosystem Services. And finally, Ecological Connectivity Index is about barrier effects and residential isolation. Now, just to elaborate on this, VVI is basically vegetation, depends on vegetation fragility and topographic climatic constraints. SVI is measured using it relates with erosion, substrate instability resulting from urban and infrastructure alterations. HVI is measured from hydrological information and expert knowledge on vulnerability of surface water and groundwater. So this is water related, this is erosion related, and this is vegetation related. So these are the three impacts that human beings can cause. And then IHI, where we talk about this species diversity and rarity, vegetation distribution range, and succession range and vegetable fragility, how new species or rather new generations are going to succeed, or what is the fragility level of those in particular vegetation. Then Corologic Index actually considers biogeographical values, the spread, the topographic diversity, spatial aggregation, and spatial eccentricity. And LMI considers capacity of relation between habitat patches, human impacts on habitats, and so on. And ESI considers goods and services obtained from habitats like carbon fixing, water regulation, erosion control, what kind of benefits we can get. And finally, ecological connectivity looks into isolated protected areas which are less likely to fulfill ecological, social, and biodiversity functions. So that means the more connected we are, it's better in that sense, right? So this actually gives us an idea that we can create very, very complex indexes using different factors, as you can see in this particular case, where we are trying to evaluate the ecological impact of urbanization, and this kind of complex indexes also could be created to ultimately generate land suitability maps. So, using the same methods, you can see that once we have generated these indexes based on these sub indexes, which are again depends on several factors within them, then we can determine the suitability as we have discussed earlier. Using, we can calculate, each of this has got these formulas using which we can create these indexes, and then overall suitability is determined in form of land suitability index, which is again using this particular formula, and based on that we can determine where we should take some corrective measures or not. So, this is how our overall index could be also created. Finally, we end up with an example that my students have done earlier, and we were developing a development plan for a Korba planning area in a development plan exercise. So, in land suitability analysis and what we are trying to do was, we are trying to determine which land has to be developed in this particular area. So, we were planning for the future, that means for the we are creating a development plan for this area. We had an urban boundary and many of that area was empty. So, we were trying to determine where we should propose future land uses, particularly where we should propose development, either residential, commercial or any other kind of development. So, Korba is in the district of Chhattisgarh. It's a district in the state of Chhattisgarh. The total planning area is around 322 square kilometers. It's an industrial and mining hub. There are a lot of thermal power plants in this particular area. There are a lot of vast coal reserves. So, when there are mines, you understand, then these are open cast mines, and a lot of this overburden needs to be taken up from the mine. That means all the material which is not coal, that has to be dumped, and then we keep on digging, and when you do that, then lot of area is taken up, and when you have thermal power plants, it generates lots and lots of pollution. So, these are the issues that were there, and this area was critically polluted at that point of time, and that was already assessed through a CPCB report of the year 2009. So, this was the situation when we started doing this assessment. So, first we determined the different factors as per issues that were related to Korba planning area. So, issues in this particular area were related with many things. For example, pollution was a big issue, land value was a big issue. Then because there were a lot of agricultural land in the surrounding area, that land availability was an issue. So, these are the different factors. We divided the entire area into square grids. Around 1406 square grids were created. Each size of each grid was around 0.25 square kilometer, which was 500 meter by 500 meter, and each cell was ranked on a 5-point scale for each aspect or factor, and all factors were given equal weightage, because we thought that we could have given weights to them, but we thought, why don't we give equal factors, equal importance to all this, and we did that. And the final suitability index was developed by multiplying factors with weights, or rather in this particular case taking the average of all the overall of all the factors. So, that because we are giving equal weightage. So, the first factor was land availability, where we have vacant or reclaimed land, which was given the highest score of 5. Cropland, which is already being cultivated, given a score of 1. That means we will keep it as cropland. Plantations were given 2, fallow land 3, scrubland 4, and so on. And land value wise, of course, the lowest value was given the highest priority, because it's better to develop in a low cost area, because high cost area of course would be difficult for even the government to procure, in case government wants to also procure some land in this particular area, and so on. So, the entire range was again equally divided into 5 scaled values. Less land value, more is the suitability. Then we looked into air pollution intensity, where pollution sensitive and safe areas were determined considering ambient air quality and wind direction during different seasons. And intensity of air pollution also decreases with distance from source. That means we have the location of the industrial stacks. From there we considered the wind direction. We saw in which direction and at different seasons, during particularly summer and winter, the smokes is going to spread, and those are the areas which are sensitive, there is more chance of pollution. So, we have given those areas lesser values. So, we took the summer and winter pollution scores, and then based on this criteria at different locations, we have given scores of where the least pollution was predicted, we were using we gave it the highest score, and where there was highest pollution being predicted, then we have given the lowest score, and that was done using the respiratory suspended particulated matter values. So, in the next one, we have also looked into road density. We used a very simple criteria. We could have used very complex accessibility criteria, but we have taken road density is taken as a determinant for level of accessibility. The road area under each cell is calculated and then we scaled that. What it means is we just determined what amount of area under road land use was there in each of these cells, and that we took. And we also considered the distance from the central business district, how far away it is from the central core. We also looked into infrastructure availability. It was a 0 and 1 criteria, where we took about if it was available or not. So, we considered road, sanitation, water supply, health facility, power supply availability. These are the different infrastructure that we considered. Where all the infrastructure was available, we gave it a score of 5, and so on. So, in this way created the factor scores, and finally this was the map that was created. You can see each grid is given a different color, and we have done the final suitability index values, and the total range extended from 1.8 to 3.3, where 3.3 greater than 3.3 was taken as most suitable, lesser than 1.8 was prohibited, everything else was in between. So, based on that, we can see this gradation that we are given in the map. This dark color is the most suitable one, the light color is the least suitable one. So, we see these are the areas which are suitable for development. Actually, the urban area is over here. So, this was suitable. Some new areas were also suggested to be suitable. These were initially empty, and then some areas over in this side. And I will just show you the actual land use map. So, in this map of an urban area, in this yellow represents the existing urban area or the habitations, and this green area is of course the forest area. Gray area are the dumps for this open cast mines, and this color over here represents the industries. So, now we see that this particular cells where we see a hatch pattern, these are the areas which are suitable, and we see these are some of the areas where we suggested future land use extension or future land use development for this area. So, we proposed our land use in those particular areas, means new developable lands in this particular areas. So, this is the final map identifying future potential developable land and considering KPI's growth, urban growth direction and pattern, and land suitability analysis both. So, that means we didn't only look into land suitability analysis, but in this map we have also considered the existing urban growth direction and pattern, which we have studied in the last lecture, and combining both we have prepared this land suitability analysis or the final land use proposed land use map. So, these are some of the references you can study, and some of them are papers, some of them are existing works that has been done, and also we have included the URDPFI guidelines. So, to conclude, we can say land suitability analysis helps us to assess suitability of land for a specific purpose on a scientific basis. However, selection of weights and factors for analysis is difficult and sometimes ambiguous due to inadequate data and inadequate knowledge experience on the part of assessor or experts. So, we have to be really careful about this. While this kind of measurement is suitable at a broad scale, such as identifying land for future development, it is inappropriate for determining suitability for land use categories at a micro scale like commercial or residential, etc., without considering the actual choice of users and the detailed local knowledge. That means, whenever we are trying to say that okay, this area is suitable for commercial development, probably we need to take into consideration other factors and plus also the behavioral factors, because people are the ones who are going to actually use those areas and so on, and they are the ones going to make decisions on land purchase or or the constructions of in a particular area and so on. Additionally, more detailed data on plot zone-wise accessibility and land price is required to determine land use suitability at a micro scale. That means two values, one is land price information is required for plot wise, not a zone wise. So that means because every plot may be of different value, and also accessibility of that particular area also needs to be analyzed. So these are the things that also needs to be considered when we develop our land suitability index for a particular area. Thank you.